Hello and welcome to R&R's Ask the Expert. I'm Kayla McGowan, Editor-in-Chief, and today we're discussing the adoption of disaster-resistant materials among homeowners. Our special guest for today is Rob Harrell, Vice President of Product Development at DocuSketch. Rob is a seasoned professional with extensive experience in property, insurance, and disaster response. He has over 20 years of knowledge and experience working for multiple Fortune 500 insurance providers and national restoration firms. He's been an Xactimate certified trainer for over 10 years. He trains thousands of students on this software. He also holds multiple certifications with the IICRC, and he's a water loss specialist with the RIA. He also has been involved in assisting with the curriculum and training for the RIA Building Construction and Science course. Please welcome Rob.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kayla. I appreciate that intro.
You are so welcome. Thank you for joining us. I know you're in the midst of all the chaos in California. So before we dive right in, I just wanted you to, for people who may not know, you just give us a little bit of your background and your role at DocuSketch.
Sure. So basically, I've been in the industry about 25 years. I've worked for, as you said, a number of different carriers. I've held a variety of roles from a desk adjuster, field adjuster, catastrophe adjuster, manager, training consultant, director of strategic innovation. So I've held a multitude of roles there, but I've also been lucky enough to be a senior project manager for a large restoration company. So the bottom line is I've seen a lot of damage, and we were kind of talking earlier, the main goal here, no matter what anyone on either side of that fence is trying to do, is trying to get our policyholders back to pre-loss condition as quickly and as I would say with as little resistance as possible.
100% agree. The customer is our ultimate priority, and whatever it means to do the job properly and get them to where they need to be is the most important thing for all of us, no matter what role you play in any of the processes. So recently there was an interesting survey, right, regarding homeowners and their willingness to pay for disaster-resistant materials. Can you kind of let us know some of the key findings that came about?
Sure. So again, it's interesting because I think, especially in light of the last couple weeks with the wildfires and Palisades and Eaton, it's brought awareness to this exact topic. In fact, I just saw a news report where someone was talking about fire-resistant materials on a building, and I can't remember the last time I've actually heard kind of the mainstream media talking about that. So, but basically, one of the key statistics that we did find in that survey was that about 79% of Americans are willing to pay a little bit more for disaster resistant materials, whether that's X-strapping for earthquakes, whether that's fire retardant or fireproof material. There's no such thing really as a fireproof material, but people are willing to pay for that. So it's really just more generational based in some of that resistance versus just not wanting to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was definitely going to say it's an investment, right? I think some people may say, oh, spending a little bit more money on this, but in the long run, I think especially with the fires we've seen, it can pay off, right?
Yes.
Particularly, right, and this happened so fast. There was no preparation because it was literally like, hey, get out, type of
Right.
situation. So I know you said generational. Can you kind of talk about that? I'm pretty sure it's probably, the millennials and maybe the Gen Zers, if I'm not mistaken. But can you kind of dive into that compared to maybe your older generations?
Absolutely. So the study we did, both Gen X and GZ, were both kind of right around that 55% said, hey, yeah, we show an interest and we would like to have more I guess, disaster resistant materials. And what we found is millennials are only kind of about 46% willing to do that. And it makes sense, right? When you stop and think about it, millennials are just kind of getting their footing. They're coming off, they might have some debt that they've incurred with student loans or just starting to kind of get up in life financially. So I think it's more of a secondary thing where they don't want to not think about it. They just might not have the financial means to be able to think about it more on the front end. So
Yeah, I think that's key too, right? When you are coming and out and getting your footing, and then you're like, I have to pay all these bills, I'm adulting, and then, you want to be proactive, but if there's a cost associated with it, you may have to pick and choose. And I think that's extremely important to really emphasize. It's not that, other generations, especially the younger ones, aren't interested in, being able to invest in disaster resistant materials. It's just maybe they don't have the means.
Yeah.
Um, and especially coming off of 2024, I think that is very true for a lot of generations. But I think maybe those in the millennial era may feel it just a little bit more like you're talking about.
Yeah.
Um,
So here's an interesting side note for you. So when we were looking at the generational gaps when I was in a lot of insurance companies, one of the questions that often came up is how do we know when the different age groups, whether it's Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, how do we know when they're starting to have more of a vested interest in insurance? And the best way I've ever heard it explained was when that generation starts buying secondary items like campers, like boats, and they start insuring that, then that's when you see them starting to become more kind of interested or sound in insurance products is when they're buying those secondary products.
yeah, that's so interesting. I also think too, it may take them to go through something also for you to say,
Yeah.
oh, okay, now they're
Yes. Oh,
interested.
that is always a big one. When someone has a loss, then they get a very keen interest on what am I paying for. So if I can just tie into that for a second, a good friend of mine, because a lot of people want to know, hey, how do I know I'm getting good insurance? That's always a question, right? And I'm not here to sell insurance by any means, but typically what happens is you will go to an insurance broker and you will say, hey, what kind of insurance can I buy? And they'll say, well, there's company A, company B, company C, company D. Now, what a lot of people may not be aware of is the Department of Insurance for each individual states regulates those contractual policy forms and conditioned endorsements, etc. The difference is most people, when they, at least I'm in this boat, when I go in and somebody goes, well, what's company A? Well, they're $500 a month. What's company B? They're $400 a month. What's company C? They're $300. And you start looking at it based on your budget. And sometimes we make a budgetary like constraint purchase, not knowing what we're getting in that $100 versus the 500. And it's when you have a major loss, you're like, oh boy, now I see the difference between that. But 100%, Kayla, to your point, most people never know that until unfortunately they've experienced a loss.
Yeah, and I think, and if we wanted to really shed light on this, a lot of people who are buying a home for the first time, a lot of times, you take advice from your auto insurance, right? Because they
Yes,
bundle. And I think that's also really scary too, because at that point, you're not looking anywhere else. You're looking for the discount for bundling and things like that. So there's several layers to this that I think are very interesting. And we could really go down a rabbit hole, but I think this is just key. This is part of the process of understanding what you're investing in, right? Not just the materials, but also what insurance you're going with, because it
yes.
makes a huge difference at the end of the day. So,
Well, and so I just want to tie this in because it's a beautiful dovetail to what you were saying. A lot of times, if you go and you get those disaster resistant materials, okay, let's just look, for example, let's just take a quick example, quick snapshot of how it could impact you. If you get a what is called a hail resistant, not hail proof, hail resistant type of shingle, you can get a substantial discount on your homeowner's policy because now many states that are in the hail driven areas, your Texas, your Oklahoma, your Colorado, they will put either, when I say they, the insurance companies will put large deductibles, generally a percentage of what your homeowner's insurance is, or they'll put an extremely large deductible on that. So if you did have a loss, you're not going to recoup unless you do have some of these disaster proof kind of resistant materials. So what I'm saying is a lot of people look at it and go, wow, for example, I have a metal roof on my house. Why did I buy that? Because I'm in the industry and I know that a metal roof may stand up a little bit better to a hailstorm. So I get a metal roof discount. And so I tried to look at it a little differently, where most people say, wow, that's a really that roof is almost a third or half is like more than what a conventional shingled roof is. But if you look at the discount over time, which a lot of people don't consider for getting the discount for having a disaster resistant material, it can sometimes offset that cost and you have a better product at the end of the day. Just a different way to think about it.
Yeah, I was definitely going to say you may feel when you're investing like, oh, it's going to be a lot of money, but over time, like you're talking about, I think it makes a difference, right? If you even just take that proactive approach, if something were to happen, because you went through and did the extra, work on your end, you may not have to replace things, right? And I think that's the other thing is replacing things over time gets more expensive, right? Like let's take for example all those affected by the fires right now. Some people bought their home 70, 80 years ago. Even if they bought their home 10 plus years ago, they can't recoup what their home is worth now, right? And I think, you know, especially with the market the way it is, interest rates and all that stuff, you can't forecast that stuff, to be completely honest. And it's better to take any precautionary means that you can to make yourself better off in the future.
Well, and let's use your example because it's such a good example. In fact, I was just talking with some people about this the other day. If I took a 2,200 square foot house, that's the kind of the median house in America, and I say, let's put that house in Los Angeles. That might be $1 million house, maybe even a $2 million house, depending on where it's at. But if I pick that house up and I move it to, let's say, rural Kansas or rural Oklahoma, it might only be a $700,000 house. And when you buy insurance, you're buying it for the sticks and bricks. So they're only insuring the actual mortar and bricks of that building. They're not doing property value. And a lot of people don't know that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think we can see it across the United States depending on where you live, right? I lived in Arkansas for a number of years and just everything is so much cheaper there. We lived in a 5 bedroom, 3 bath home that was 2 stories, basement and everything. And when we sold, I think it was like maybe 250 or so. And out here, I'm in Nevada. Man, that's a $500,000 house if at the
All day
very
long.
minimum,
Yeah,
right?
all day long,
So
that is right.
So I think the biggest thing is understanding that there are like underlying factors and decisions you're making on insurance coverage, even where you buy. I think that's the other thing too. And so when you guys did all of this survey and gathered all this information, what were some of the underlying factors that you think might influence like the different views or attitudes around, the generations and their income levels, right? Because I think medium income is not the same in every state or across the world right now for us. And so, how does that influence some of the decisions that are made? I know you talked about those A, B, and C scenarios, but what else may be taken into consideration?
Yeah, like like let's look at sometimes the methodology that I've seen people try to sell products with. So a lot of times, because again, I don't want to use the same example as the insurance premiums, but let's say a roofing salesman, for example, is trying to show some different options to a policyholder who may have been impacted by a loss, and they go out and they say, well, what do you have? Well, I have $1,000, $500, or $100. Well, most people are going to gravitate towards 100. But I think if the maturation of the conversation flows to, okay, I know you're looking at the 100 or $500, but did you know over the course of time, the $1,000 you're paying, should you have a loss, you're going to actually lose a lot more value, perceived value, whatever you want to call it, in buying $100 product, and it might not stand up as good over the hit. Like it's just that the going over the longevity of a product, I understand, but a lot of times when I've watched things, I haven't seen that value sold versus just someone going, nah, I'll just want the cheapest one. I would stop and say you might want to reconsider that, understanding most people are living on a budget. You might want to help them understand what that value is in the case of a loss. So if they ever, God forbid, get in that situation of hailstorm, earthquake, fire loss, water damage, they understand that the value, the intrinsic value that they're getting.
Yeah, I was definitely going to say if someone thinks about it kind of like auto insurance, right? Like
Yep.
if something happens to your car, you're out of pocket, right? Think about it that way too. And I think sometimes people don't think about having to, well, they're hoping that they don't have to use it, right? So
Right.
in the event that they have to, it's like, oh no, we didn't plan accordingly. And I think that's really important. And I think, awareness will help all generations across the board because, sometimes you live in a space where you don't think you're going to need it and you're like, minimum, I'll be fine. And then you realize, oh no, we're in big trouble. It didn't
Yeah.
it didn't work out the way that it was supposed to. So in kind of in tune with this, how can our industry restoration professionals address these types of concerns and maybe help those who may be hesitant to invest in disaster resistant materials and even really just kind of explaining it, I guess, is the biggest thing. I know sometimes our lingo is a little different from the consumer, but what would your take be on that?
So I think, there's a number of different ways to do it. So the first thing is maybe they can create documentation that they can share with people, either digital or paper, that shows the value or what sometimes happens. What I mean by that is you would be amazed, and I know for your audience listening, this happens all the time. People will reach out to them when they've had that water loss in their house or a fire loss, or they'll reach out and say, "Hey, how does this work?" So just some sort of details to walk someone through the process where it shows how some of these resistant materials may impact them. I think that's a good start. I think using case studies or industry just background. Hey, did you know that in the Eaton fires, if they would have had fire resistance, it could have lowered that indemnity cost or out of pocket cost to X. And then I also think any type of technology they can use, such as any type of immersed imagery or anything you can do to kind of show them the before and after or different ways that they may benefit from these resistant materials. I think that's everybody likes visual stuff, so I think that's a huge one.
Yeah, I would definitely say providing a document or even something digital shows that you not only care, but you're showing them how to be proactive and why it matters. I think a lot of decisions that are made nowadays, especially with anything that involves money, is why, how. What you have to explain it in those layers. And then when you leave something behind, they're constantly still thinking about, and they can look at it, right? And maybe
Yep.
figure out where the gaps are and maybe even reach out to you and ask you questions later on follow up because now they're understanding where you're coming from and it just builds collaboration. I would definitely say it's not about the sale, and I think that's the other thing is customers want to feel like they're cared for, and this is a great way to do just that, is to show them that we care by taking that extra step to show them case studies and stats and the whys behind some of the stuff that we're talking to them about.
Yeah.
um
I think something that, like, for example, timing is so critical. So what I'm saying is right now, if you're a contractor in LA, because I just returned from there after, with all the fires, maybe in the next 6 to 8 months, when some of the healing and some of the financials resolution or things are coming in, maybe you can hold workshops to basically bring people in to say, hey, we just went through this experience. How can you protect yourself in the future and be seen as an industry expert or an industry leader in that community?
Yeah, and I was going to say too, especially if you're in that particular community, you
Yep.
become a voice of reason and someone that is trusted not only in times of crisis, but just for regular day things, right? We have water heater situations, we have backups in our toilets. I mean,
Every
there's so
day.
many things that can happen every day, right? So, in talking about this portion, how can insurance carriers play a huge role in this as well? And maybe even collaboration between the carriers and us as restoration professionals. I think that's going a little bit more of an extra mile to have all parties, even the consumer, kind of talk it all out and what the benefits are. How do you think they can play a role in that?
Well, it's such a good question, Kayla. I think the first thing, in my opinion, is awareness. And what I mean by awareness is everybody remembers when Flow with Progressive came out with uh, chart how you drive or do these things, and then people started seeing a discount on their insurance premiums because of their conditions of how they drive. Well, we know with the technology of smart homes, the Nest, different water alarms. I've seen that there's significant discounts that a lot of carriers will offer, but they don't really advertise those like they do maybe so much as the auto side. So I think the property side's kind of lacking where they talk. You used a term earlier today, which I agree with. It was bundling, right? But they don't
Mhm.
talk about, hey, if you get water alarms on all your on your refrigerator and different devices, you'll get a 10% discount on your. I think that needs to be highlighted a little bit more. So they're working in collaboration to educate or make that policyholder aware of just the discounts that are out there.
Yeah, and I would definitely say if all parties were involved as well, it makes it more of like a group discussion and decision and all that. I
Collaborative.
think it's so collaborative. It also brings peace of mind to our consumer,
Yep.
right? Because they're like they don't understand, it's all foreign to them. And I think, collaboration is king in everything that we do, not just in our professional lives, but just in life in general. And I think that's a great point to bring up because this is no different. Collaboration is key, especially in educating our homeowners. So what kind of tips do you have for our industry professionals to efficiently collaborate with carriers to help subsidize the cost of these types of materials? I think we kind of talked about, just getting on the phone. It's that simple, but maybe it's I don't know, group, some type of group, Facebook, in person. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think again, it's it starts with kind of local government. And what I mean by local, I'm trying to think through a scenario to give you a more sophisticated answer, Kayla, where I really think like coming out of the LA wildfires, and don't mean to use LA or political or anything else. I just think that we're going to start seeing carriers that would say, I can even use Asheville, North Carolina as an example.
Mhm.
When we look at these disaster areas, it's how can the contractor, the carrier, and the policyholder actually we actually kind of we have presentations around this where we call things the restoration triangle. And what the restoration triangle is, at the top of that triangle, you have the policyholder. The left of the triangle is the carriers, and the right of the triangle is the contractors. And in the middle, it's the project or the property. And what we say is, how can we always look at the property or the project to get the greatest good or to make sure that we're protecting the property of the project. And I think that's that collaboration that all three can start working around to be able to say, how can we make this more conducive for our policyholders with a discount? How can we make it easier to sell for our contractors? And they're just working, I hate to use this word, we've used it 3 times today, but collaborative more experiences. But I think, again, it's awareness in these events, catastrophe events, while they stink for people going through it, it can bring opportunity out like this.
Yeah, and I would definitely say through opportunity becomes lesson. There comes lessons, and there's more preparation on our end, proactiveness. And I think, everything that we see, especially with disasters, there's lessons that are huge right in our face that can help us be better. And I think the triangle, you know, uh, example you just gave is proof. You're looking at the thing in the middle where you're not looking at each point because everybody has to work together in order to successfully start and finish that project in particular. It reminds me of like sports, right? You have offense and defense, and you may not see things the same, but the ultimate goal is to win the game. And so here it's the same way. The ultimate goal is to take care of the homeowner and get them back in a state of living close to normalcy, right? I don't dare say normal because it's not really normal at that point, right? Something is different. And I think that's also important too, is it may not be exactly the same, but we're going to do our best together to make sure we can get to that point.
Right. That's exactly right.
So, in speaking of all the survey and, the materials, what do you think or see as the future of resilient housing in the context of what you guys found in these surveys?
Um, I think it's tough because the interesting thing is looking at catastrophes over my history. Um, the most frequent are hail losses. So there's been a lot of advancement in hail resistant materials. But the most costly are fires. And I think that this is an opportunity now where because of the large event that's going on in LA and because it's heightened awareness politically, celebrities, all of that, I think we're going to see more of a rise to just being aware of those building materials. So many times we're not, but I think that some of these bigger events. I mean, again, we look at what happened at Helene with the Western North Carolina region. We look at how these and every time one of these happens, people say, "Okay, well, how can we do it better?" And I've seen it improve so much. In fact, I'll even tie it into this. One of the industry leaders from the restoration world was recently on a news program that I was watching, and he was talking about how his house was saved because he used fire retardant materials. And so you start looking and hearing success stories like that, and I think that's going to be more of how we get that education out there and how it becomes more readily available. Again, awareness, discounts, just talking about it today probably has helped raise a little bit more awareness to it. So,
Yeah, those are great points because I also think that especially we're talking to people who are brand new in this space, maybe
oh,
mid-career towards the end of their career, and I think you can learn something every single day, especially from watching something like this. Maybe it's how you talk to your customers about things, or maybe it's talking about, hey, in our local area, did you know that X, Y, and Z? And I think when you give real life scenarios, it also humanizes what we're trying to talk about and it's relatable. And I think that's the another key in helping the homeowner make some decisions based on disaster resistant materials. I know in higher risk areas it may be taken a little bit seriously now since we've seen, in less than, what is it, 6 months, we've seen both ends of this of, water and fire. We've even had tornadoes and snow, right? What do you think the approach is in the high risk areas? Do you think it's going to be any different for having those homeowners be open to disaster resistant materials?
yeah, I really do. And the reason why I say that is if I look at a state like Florida, for example, Florida's building codes in high wind areas, they're AKA Hurricane Alley kind of thing. They have different nailing patterns on their shingles or different wind resistant, or they have what are called hurricane straps, what are mandated by building code. So I think the more we can interject whether it's the IBC or IRC, the International Building Code or the International Residential Code, whenever we can have resistant materials brought in, whether it's hurricane strapping in California, whatever we can do as an industry to kind of push that through building codes or something else, then I think that again just benefits that policyholder at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I know I sound like a broken record at this point about collaboration, but this is another key point, right? It takes a variety of people in different positions and honestly in different industries, to be completely honest, to make things happen and spread awareness like we're talking about. And you can see it because like you said in Florida, they have a set of code where we probably here in Nevada have no such thing in our set of code, to be completely honest. We do see wind and stuff like that, but we may get hail occasionally, but really we live in a pretty decent area, I would definitely say. But that's how we help our homeowners understand. That's how we again collaborate with those around us to enforce and reinforce the importance of things like shingles or I think I saw Kobe Bryant's house is mainly like concrete and I don't know what else, which is actually really smart, right? And so it does cost more, right? Let's be real, it does cost more, but in the long run, that could be an investment that can mean a difference between, having a home and having to have some restorative efforts done or completely losing your home, right?
Well, I would say this, Kayla, is that number one for me, and I think I would say 99% of the people listening to this, your home's your biggest investment. I know it is for me. And there's another thing I can tell you, and this is Captain Obvious Rob, is that I don't care where you live, the weather or some sort of catastrophe event, it doesn't matter. What I'm saying is you're going to be impacted by it. You could live in New York and you say, well, we don't really get tornadoes up here. Okay, that might be true, but you get deep freezes and thaws. I mean, we think back to Dallas in 2019 at the deep all they had because of so many houses were impacted, and residents and buildings and hotels, they were all impacted because they didn't have the right insulation for that
Mhm.
event. So it doesn't matter where you live at in the country, some sort of weather event or a catastrophe probably going to impact you with the greatest investment you have, your house.
Oh,
So
100%. 100%. We have flash flooding, right? That's one of the biggest things we have here is
sure.
flooding.
Yep.
Um, homes catch on fire. I think that's another thing, right? Like to your point, you said you may not have regular occurrences like, your Florida, California, even your coastal areas where they have, hurricanes and things like that. But just a couple houses down from us, our neighbor's house caught on fire.
Yeah.
And it spread really quickly. It's dry here. I the first thing I said was turn the air conditioning off. That was the first thing I said is turn it off. I don't want smoke in this house. I don't want to sit in this house. Inevitably something does happen. But that is a huge thing too, right? And just to your
Yes.
point, I think that's extremely important because house fires happen. I mean, flooding
Yeah.
happens, water heater, bad pipe. But I digress. We could definitely go on and on and on about all of this. So I do have one more question for you, and I
Sure.
think this one is really important because the biggest thing I love about our industry is we're constantly learning from others. And
Oh,
I love advice. I love hearing advice. I sometimes give advice. I think we're all in that space where you give and you take. So, with that being said, what advice would you give to some of our industry professionals looking to advocate for resilient housing materials in their particular communities?
well, I will be the first to tell you that I am so thankful for advice because probably 95% of what I've learned in the industry, I've learned from contractors being on the insurance side. So I always look at trying to be collaborative. I know that wasn't your question, but the advice I would give people is just how can we enter conversations as an industry? When I talk about the ecosystem, how can the contractor and the carrier potentially work together to educate the homeowner or give them different types of ideas about, hey, have you ever thought of this? Have you ever thought of that? This would be a good idea. Now, while neither one wants to co-promote the other in a conflict of interest space, what I'm saying is, if for example, if I was a contractor, I might say, ask your adjuster how frequent this occurs. So you're backing up or providing, I would say, critical analysis for why somebody should invest with something. Just something that comes up to me off the top of my head type of thing.
Yeah, I think that's important too, is don't be afraid to ask questions, right?
Oh,
That's literally, man, that's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received is don't be afraid to ask questions because chances are somebody else has the same question that you do.
yep.
Um, I say this all the time. The only bad question is the one you don't
When it
ask,
doesn't
to
get
be
asked, right? That's right. You're
exactly.
right.
That's the only bad question. And you could be helping somebody else without directly helping them as well. I've
Yep.
learned a lot today, by the way. I've really enjoyed your company and your
Thank you.
conversation and all of
Right.
your insights. It's been very informative. And this is what this is all about, right? Taking the time to just have these conversations and take sound bites out and learn from one another. So, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. And for all of you
Absolutely.
listening, this is Rob. He's a great guy. He obviously knows the space, right? So until next time, everybody, we will see you on Ask the Expert. Take care.